Long ago, on the continent of Mu, there was a prosperous kingdom called Sian. In that kingdom lived a golden-haired princess. To celebrate her coming of age, a grand party was organized in her honor. But, in the middle of the celebration, a dark wizard appeared uninvited. Afraid of the princess's power, which surpassed his own, the wizard cast a curse on her. The spell hit her directly. The kingdom was then covered in thorns, and the land became infertile, unable to sustain life. The people had no choice but to abandon their home. And so the cursed princess was left behind, asleep in her castle. Long after, a young woman spent her days on the outskirts of that same castle. She gathered herbs one by one. Tired, she sighed, feeling that this work would never end. Suddenly, a strange noise broke the silence. She looked up and saw the impossible. The sky was cracking. The young woman wondered if it was what she expected. The barrier finally broke. Shocked, she ran towards the castle without thinking twice. Each step was driven by hope. To escape her fate, the young woman threw herself from the top of the tower. After 147 years of a miserable life, she finally saw a chance to break her curse. Only the great leap ended in a much less dramatic way, and someone watched everything, with a slight smile on their face. Suddenly, a strange energy filled the hall. The man turned, trying to understand what he saw. He noticed the emblem, but not the weapon. Could it be a mage? That was the crest of the Cyan royal family. But when he looked again, there was only a chicken. He wondered if he had been deceived, or the sacrifice of his knights. Would it have been for nothing? Frustration took over the monarch. A man of his position could not accept such a failure. The chicken, however, seemed furious at the lack of respect. The bird's reaction took the man by surprise. It didn't make any sense. Outside, a knight panicked, shouting about a cursed chicken in the hall. Aflame, the heiress flew towards the knight. She demanded that Sir Paul hand over his sword immediately. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The aura of the small bird was heavy and menacing. Amidst the flames, she delivered her judgment, demanding that they repent for their sins. The princess then attacked the man, who had no chance to react. It was revealed that this chicken was, in fact, Brienne v. Cyan. The emperor, confused, asked Orwell if their mission wasn't to find a sleeping princess. Brienne, however, seemed extremely proud of the impression she made. The whole situation was already giving the emperor a headache, and to make matters worse, after all the chaos, the princess simply decided to take a nap. He stood there staring at the bird, not knowing how to process what was happening, but the rest was short-lived. Brienne woke up and attacked him with lightning, questioning his authority. The emperor's patience was clearly wearing thin. Orwell, on the other hand, just watched with a weary expression. And so, the entire imperial delegation was at a standstill, standing before a chicken on a cushion. He tried to argue, but the princess simply turned her back, completely ignoring him. While Brienne claimed victory, the soldiers came to a conclusion. The emperor had gone mad. The imperial guards couldn't believe the scene, but the emperor, ignoring everyone, seemed to have a very clear plan in mind. For a moment, the man and the chicken stared at each other. They both seemed to share the same panic at the bizarre situation. Then, without further hesitation, the emperor stepped forward and tried to hold the little bird's beak. At the exact moment of contact, an intense light exploded from it. A gigantic magic circle manifested in the hall, revealing the power hidden in that unusual form. The advisor, who had doubted before, finally understood everything. He apologized for his disbelief. The emperor was right from the start. He recognized the nature of the magic and warned the others that it was an attack spell. Amidst the smoke, the truth was spoken aloud. The chicken was Princess Surya, and she needed to be captured. But it was too late. The princess sped up her escape. In her thoughts, Surya regretted raising hopes. Those brutish men could not be the heroes who would break her curse. With a final flap of her wings, she flew away. The princess left the great castle behind. Back in the hall, amidst the dust, a hooded figure watched the scene of the escape. It was the emperor, and he was visibly annoyed that he had let the princess escape. Orwell approached to hand over the cloak. He wanted to know how his master discovered that the chicken was Princess Soria. The emperor stared at Orwell. His answer was unexpectedly simple. He confirmed his aide's suspicion. The fugitive was indeed Princess Soria. The explanation was unbelievable. The princess herself had confessed. Orwell couldn't process the information. The emperor didn't hold back. The whole situation was so absurd that he could only laugh. Orwell, on the other hand, was completely speechless. The truth was too bizarre. Even the other knights, upon hearing the story, had to agree that it was unbelievable. The emperor then turned to leave, giving a clear order that no one should follow him. The order was direct. Everyone stopped immediately without question. He explained that it wasn't a lack of trust in his men. The issue was another. There was simply no more time to lose. Far away, the princess felt the weight of that desperate escape. The emperor made his final decision. He himself would settle the matter with the princess. He knew she had escaped through the back window, probably towards the garden. On the way, however, something made him stop. A family portrait on the wall. He looked at the princess's face in the picture. It was hard to believe that that lady and the chicken were the same person. The image of the princess, as a furious bird, still haunted the emperor's mind. The whole situation was simply unbelievable. But the princess wasn't far away. Hidden, she watched everything carefully. Nearby, another nobleman found the tracks of the escape. He couldn't hide a mocking laugh. The emperor followed the clues through the garden. His expression was serious. He needed to find her and resolve this once and for all. And then he found her. The princess was stuck headfirst in the ground. There was no escape anymore. He knelt down and tried to be reasonable, explaining that running away wouldn't solve her problems. Without much ceremony, he pulled her out. Holding the princess, he tried to propose a truce, suggesting they forget the previous incident. The princess couldn't believe what she was hearing. The emperor's proposal was a complete insult. The emperor watched her silently, perhaps finally understanding the depth of her frustration. She remembered who she really was, a genius mage, and now she was trapped in this body. Her frustration finally exploded. She told him to stop talking and go away, and she struggled with all her might to escape. In a fit of pure rage, the princess pecked him right in the face. Her patience was gone. The emperor tried to keep his composure. The peck to the face caught him completely by surprise. She then vented, reminding him that the only thing she had to eat was grass. Life as a chicken was a nightmare. He was shocked to hear about her diet, but the princess confirmed it, seeming almost proud, and surprisingly, she didn't seem to be starving. On the contrary, the emperor tried to show some empathy, but the whole situation was too bizarre. The princess then began to explain the origin of the curse, all because of a love confession from an unknown mage. She questioned if the curse was because she rejected the mage, but the emperor revealed a different version of the story, which shocked the princess. Shocked by what she heard, she broke free and flew away, wanting to understand what people really thought. He confirmed that to the world the story was different. She was defeated in a duel and transformed as punishment. The princess stared down at him suspiciously. Her suspicions about his intentions only increased. She directly accused him of using her situation as an excuse to conquer her kingdom. But the princess made it clear that this would never happen. She promised herself that she would fight to prevent it. Only the emperor was faster. He caught her in the air before she could escape. He reminded her that she was a chicken, not a hawk, and took her back to the castle. And to make sure she wouldn't run away again, he put her in a cage. The princess's freedom was over. The emperor tried to argue, but the princess's stubbornness was annoying. He didn't understand why she made such absurd assumptions about him. She, however, spat back all her indignation. The princess accused him of preparing an invasion, questioning how she could trust him while his armies were preparing. The emperor could hardly believe what he was hearing. He tried to explain that the situation was much simpler than she imagined. He stated that he didn't need a war. In time, the kingdom of Sian would naturally become part of the empire. Then, he confronted her with a harsh reality. How would she protect a kingdom when her own people abandoned it, leaving her alone? The image of her loneliness was bleak, a queen without a people, trapped and isolated from the world. But the princess didn't give up. She had an answer on the tip of her tongue. She stated that as long as the land and its ruler existed, there would be hope. Once the curse was broken, her people would return. The emperor listened to her hopeful speech. Tired of the argument, he finally gave in. He decided to give her the chance to prove that her faith was justified. Then, he asked her to solve the problem of the thorns. But the princess exploded, yelling that she couldn't do that. She explained with frustration. It would be possible, if it weren't for the curse that completely limited her mana control. The emperor connected the dots. In other words, she could only help him after her curse was broken. The emperor pondered what it would take to break the curse. He wondered if only a hero could do it. He considered the options: a hero, a warrior, a knight. It didn't matter. It was then that his attention stopped on a specific scene. The idea of a knight seemed plausible, but he knew times had changed. Heroes and warriors from fairy tales no longer existed. It was at that moment that his eyes landed on a young man carrying a stack of books. The boy seemed to be struggling, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. The emperor hurried him, saying that they needed to leave soon. The young man just agreed, trying not to drop the stack of books. But then the emperor asked an unexpected question. He recalled that Diorwell had also practiced fencing before. A completely absurd idea began to form in the emperor's mind. He decided that he would grant Diorwell the honor of becoming the empire's first great mage knight. The young man's reaction was pure disbelief. The proposal didn't make any sense. The emperor continued, explaining that Diorwell would be the hero, the warrior, and the knight, all in one person. He would be the chosen one to break the princess's curse. The emperor then took the books to lighten his load. And to seal the deal, he opened the cage and gave a direct order. Diorwell should give the princess a pledge kiss. The boy froze. He was sure that the emperor had completely lost his mind. While the emperor picked up the books, Diorwell could only think that he had gone completely insane. The books went to the ground. The mission was more important now. Diorwell questioned how the emperor was so sure that this was the princess. The answer was simple. She had told him herself. The problem is that to Diorwell, all that came out of the cage were chicken sounds. So, the young man decided to test the monarch's sanity. He asked the emperor to ask the princess a question for him. The question was a clear test of knowledge. What is the most difficult magic potion to make? After a brief conversation with the chicken, the emperor gave the answer. It was a love potion. The strangest thing was that the emperor himself seemed confused by the answer, as if he didn't even believe such a potion existed. This sparked a doubt in Diorwell. What if the emperor was somehow really communicating with her? So the young man explained that, unlike the emperor, he couldn't talk to Princess Soria. The princess didn't seem to like that statement at all. He continued, questioning why the emperor would be the only one capable of talking to her, and he suggested that in that case, the two of them. The suggestion was interrupted by a desperate scream. The emperor's response was a resounding no, and that's when it clicked. All that talk was just a way to make Diorwell kiss an animal in his place. The emperor dropped the cage, exhausted just at the thought. That plan had gone down the drain. After the disastrous plan, the emperor and the princess were completely exhausted on the floor. But it was time to leave. A knight approached, bringing bad news about how to transport the princess in her current form. The emperor was already expecting another problem. The princess, in turn, watched everything with disdain. She questioned if this was treatment befitting royalty. Without another option, the emperor decided to take the princess himself, trying to calm the situation with a caress. But she didn't like the gesture at all. The emperor still tried to argue that anger would lead nowhere. Her response was immediate and quite painful. The emperor felt the bite in his soul. The princess, on the other hand, seemed quite pleased with the result. She made it clear that she was only putting up with this because of the curse. It was a temporary alliance and nothing more. The emperor's patience was wearing thin quickly. He reminded her that assaulting an emperor was considered an act of treason. The threat, however, didn't have the expected effect, leaving him unsure how to react. The princess dared him to go ahead with the punishment. After all, did he really want to go down in history as the first emperor to execute a chicken for treason? The princess's taunt hit him hard. He remembered the shameful historical record of an emperor who committed treason because of a chicken. The idea terrified him. Already on horseback, holding Princess Soria, the emperor felt how dreadful the whole situation was. He then noticed something strange and questioned the formation of his knights. One of them explained that to advance as quickly as possible, they got rid of all unnecessary baggage. The princess, in her chicken form, listened to the conversation attentively. However, not all the baggage was discarded. Diorwell, the great mage, was with them, carrying a fortune in imperial family jewels. The revelation about the jewels left the princess completely shocked. The emperor seemed confused by this strategy, but a knight was trying to explain the plan. Diorwell just confirmed that he would follow orders. The emperor still didn't understand what was happening. The mage then revealed that they would use their last resort and began to prepare a spell. The spell summoned a barrier of swords around them. Princess Soria, however, didn't seem at all impressed with the display of power. Ahead, the path was blocked by barricades in an open and barren field. The imperial troop advanced in formation, ready for the imminent confrontation. The emperor panicked, insisting he wasn't lying and that none of this made sense. As he lost his balance on the horse, Orwell seemed completely exhausted by the conversation. The emperor tried to describe the monstrous thorn bushes they faced along the way, but Princess Soria, in her chicken form, just pointed to their destination. She commented that the imperial palace of Crotia was right there, just a few feet away. The princess sighed, tired of so much drama. The emperor argued that the trip took almost half a day, a dangerous journey between realms. He reinforced how terrible and cruel the thorns were, but no one seemed to believe him. Soria, with pure sarcasm, said that the way he talked, the thorns seemed more like knights protecting Sienne, a natural barrier that defended the kingdom. Her comment left the emperor speechless and visibly offended. They continued on their way in an awkward silence. The emperor looked at the princess, perhaps reflecting on the situation, but Soria simply broke free and flew towards the palace, stating that the problem wasn't hers. Shocked, the emperor asked Orwell if he was mistaken about chickens being able to fly. The emperor couldn't believe what had happened. The princess simply flew away, leaving him in complete despair. Orwell just watched, trying to process the bizarre situation. Back in the office, the emperor, still frustrated, said that it would be impossible to find a single chicken in the world. Orwell, however, believed that she would soon realize how harsh the world was out there and would come back on her own. He then suggested that this could be the perfect opportunity to raise an important issue, but a doubt began to trouble the emperor's mind. He remembered that the thorns, created by the wizard to imprison the princess, receded towards her. That didn't make sense. Orwell seemed to understand the terrible implication right away. The emperor rose from his chair. He walked away, turning his back to Orwell. The theory forming in his mind was absurd. What if the wizard had been trapped in his own spell for over 100 years? After all, spells sometimes go differently than planned. The emperor emphasized that the only proof they had was the princess's word. Orwell was shocked by the possibility. The chicken could actually be the wizard in disguise. Orwell's mind went back to the expedition. The emperor, without heirs, spent a fortune on it, a stubbornness that now seemed even more dangerous. The emperor, however, seemed to have overcome the initial shock. His expression was one of pure determination, with a plan already formed. Orwell, on the other hand, still couldn't digest the information. The possibility of the wizard being there, disguised, terrified him. The emperor let out a tired sigh. Enough with the theories. It was time to act and test the proof. With a gesture to calm his advisor, the emperor gave a simple but very strange order. He asked Orwell to bring a white chicken, an apparently meaningless task, but it was the key to his plan. Meanwhile, in another part of the empire, the supposed Princess Soria continued with her own mission. Through the corridors, the servants whispered about the unusual movement of nobles and knights in the place. The agitation was general, but the true huntress went completely unnoticed by everyone. Hidden in the bushes, Soria lamented the lack of heroes. She would have to settle for a simple knight. Her target was a specific knight, one who wore the golden insignia of the Imperial Guard. To find her target, she knew exactly where to go, the place where the elite gathered, and that led her directly to the order of the Falcon headquarters. The plan was in action. 3 days passed, and then a night terror news about the terror of that night began to spread. Through the corridors, the maids commented on the high number of knights who had fallen. The maids continued to gossip, not understanding why the so-called night terror only pulled on the knight's lips and ran away. The conversation, however, did not go unnoticed by those nearby. The man who was listening knew right away who it was. He was sure it was Princess Soria. He watched the corridor processing the information he had just received. Then he approached his subordinate to discuss the matter. The young man, Orwell, seemed confused. He couldn't understand the logic behind the princess's actions. Meanwhile, the emperor presented his own plan to the advisors. He showed a chicken, claiming that it was Princess Soria. Back in the corridor, the superior told Orwell that the situation couldn't continue. They needed a better plan, and elsewhere, the real princess was just taking a nap in a basket. Soria felt that her search for the knights had been a complete waste of time. Frustrated, she jumped out of the basket, determined to try something new. That's when a terrible possibility occurred to her. What if the hero destined to break her curse was the emperor himself? The mere idea panicked her. She sighed, thinking about how a chicken would manage to invade the emperor's room. But she soon dismissed the thought. That would only be the last resort, after exhausting all other options. With her decision made, Soria flew out the window, ready to begin her mission. She filled herself with courage, determined to try everything before resorting to her last terrible option. And so, she found her target's room. She mentally apologized to the knight, Sir Chen, for what she was about to do, except the knight wasn't sleeping. Soria went into total panic. She tried to flee, but the noise of the commotion had already taken over the room. Too late. He grabbed her by the leg. Sir Chen justified himself, saying that there was no problem in holding a chicken's leg, but she wouldn't stop struggling, and the knight's patience was running out. He then looked at a bag in the corner of the room, getting an idea. Without ceremony, he put her inside and tied it up. With the princess finally quiet, Sir Chen began the conversation he wanted to have. He sat on the bed, ready to explain the whole situation. Trapped and unable to move, Soria had no choice but to listen to what he had to say. Sir Chen began to explain his theory, mentioning the Xian River, which cut through the center of the kingdom. He had trapped her in the bag precisely so he could have this conversation. The princess, obviously, didn't like the idea at all, but now quiet and immobilized, she was forced to listen. Then he revealed a dark truth. The Xian River had stopped flowing more than 50 years ago because of a blockage. The news caught Soria completely by surprise. She simply couldn't believe what she heard. Sir Chen admitted that he didn't know the exact cause, but that this was their best guess. He continued, remembering that water doesn't just come from the land, but also falls from the sky. It turns out that the south was facing a severe drought. It hadn't rained in a long time. Soria listened to everything, processing the real situation of the kingdom. This was the reason why the emperor of a great nation would personally visit a small kingdom forgotten by all. Soria provoked him, questioning whether he was such a kind emperor. He replied that yes, he was just doing what any ruler should do for his people. The comment caught Sir Chen off guard. Apparently, no one had ever praised him that way before. The gesture caught him by surprise. He felt a strange sensation, something he couldn't explain. Without thinking twice, the emperor got up and left the room. The chicken was left behind, not understanding his sudden reaction. Outside, Orwell was waiting, but was caught by surprise. The emperor simply kicked down the door. and grabbed him by the collar without warning. Orwell was shocked, asking what had happened to His Majesty. But the Emperor had a serious expression, as if he had discovered something terrible. He pointed to the chicken and stated that she must be the mage they were looking for. Orwell couldn't process the information. Then, the Emperor began to explain everything that had happened moments before. The story was so bizarre that Orwell was in shock, without reaction. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Emperor insisted that the chicken could manipulate emotions, proving that their theory was correct. The Emperor described the princess's gesture as cute and innocent. Orwell, however, didn't buy the story. Outraged, the Emperor asked if Orwell really thought he was so gullible as to fall for that act. The bizarre conversation continued right there in the room, with the supposed mage watching everything from afar. The Emperor then began to tell about his loyal knight, Sir Chen, a trusted man. He had been entrusted with an important mission, to escort the princess during the night shift. Only the task was thankless and exhausting, extra work for which he wasn't even paid. To make matters worse, he was starving and his stomach wouldn't stop growling. The knight felt a pang of fatigue and frustration. This job was killing him. Finally, he arrived at the Emperor's office to report. Sir Chen announced his arrival, saying that he heard His Majesty wanted to see him, but upon entering, the scene he found was at the very least unexpected. Was the subject the chicken? The Emperor then gave an absurd order, which left the knight completely shocked. Even without understanding anything, Sir Chen obeyed and knelt before the bird. The Emperor gave a strict order, and the knight, still in shock, confirmed that he would fulfill it. Back in the present, the Emperor concluded the story, explaining to Orwell that it was a confidential matter. The Emperor then began to explain the situation to the knight Sir Chen. The knight was radiant, honored to have been personally chosen for a mission. The Emperor recalled the knight's heroic feat. He had rescued Princess Soria in the kingdom of Sian. Faced with such an honor, and with the fate of the empire in his hands, Sir Chen knelt in a sign of loyalty. Only there was one detail. The Princess Soria in question was there, in the form of a chicken. And, of course, as the Emperor explained, she vehemently denied the situation. The Emperor then approached, and the knight's heart raced with the importance of the moment. And then came the request. He needed to be the hero of the empire and break the curse. By kissing the princess, the pressure of the mission was immense. The future of everyone depended on that single act. The knight, however, was confused. He needed clarification on what kissing meant in that context. Sir Chen's question about where exactly he should kiss the bird was so bizarre that it broke everyone's composure. Princess Soria, trapped in her chicken form, was visibly embarrassed by the discussion. Sir Chen was genuinely trying to understand the logistics of kissing a beak. It was an unexpected anatomical problem. One of the aides, already out of patience with the debate, suggested that they just go ahead and get it over with. He reinforced that the exact location didn't matter, as long as the kiss happened and the curse was broken. After the long discussion, Sir Chen prepared for the kiss. The knight was visibly tense about the bizarre situation. The proximity to the royal bird was so embarrassing that he barely knew how to proceed. For a brief moment, Princess Soria believed that her curse would finally come to an end. Only it didn't work. The kiss didn't break the spell, and the hope dissolved into thin air. The princess was completely disappointed. The curse continued, and now she felt bad for the knight. Back in the hall, the Emperor, exhausted, dismissed everyone. He declared that the day was over. Hearing that, the princess collapsed to the floor. All hope of breaking the curse was gone. The Emperor then revealed a personal vow. He would never kiss anyone who wasn't his future empress. The princess heard that and couldn't believe it. She realized he was serious about his moral principles. She thought he was totally losing focus on the situation. But the Emperor had reached a conclusion. He looked at the chicken, with an expression as if he was about to make a drastic decision. Without warning, the Emperor grabbed Princess Soria. He declared that he would make a sacrifice for the good of the empire. The princess, however, panicked and asked him to let her go. She screamed desperately, not understanding what he intended to do. but the emperor didn't let her go. He was determined to break his own vow and the curse once and for all. The princess screamed in panic, but the sound of her protest was lost in the night. The decisive moment had arrived. And then the emperor broke his sacred vow. He kissed the chicken, a kiss that was supposed to break the curse. The princess's soul even seemed to leave her body. After the shock, shame took over her. The situation was simply humiliating. Suddenly, the emperor collapsed into the chair, to the astonishment of his assistant. The sacrifice seemed to have taken its toll. The emperor could barely stay conscious. The princess, on the other hand, seemed fine. She just didn't understand what had just happened. The assistant tried to cheer him up, saying that now he would be a hero for breaking the curse. But the princess interrupted, confused by what he was saying. She flapped her wings, trying to get their attention. The emperor didn't understand anything. The assistant then explained that the curse was not completely broken. It finally dawned on him. His sacrifice had not worked as expected. The assistant, however, pointed out that there was a visible change. He noticed that even the color of her tail had changed, a small sign that something at least was different. The emperor was silent, processing the situation. His sacrifice had not been enough. Princess Surya couldn't believe it. Was this guy really the hero who was supposed to save her? Asked about his skill with the sword, the emperor coldly admitted that he was only mediocre. She recalled that, at the age of 5, she had already realized that she was no good with a sword. So, with sarcasm, she asked if his nickname was hero or warrior. The emperor found her question completely ridiculous. His answer left Princess Surya completely outraged. He explained that he didn't need to be a hero, because as emperor, he was above everyone. For Surya, this justification was simply unbelievable. The princess collapsed, defeated by his absurd logic. Orwell watched the scene, beginning to doubt everything. He began to tremble, questioning whether that chicken was really Princess Surya. Orwell suggested to the emperor that maybe it wasn't the princess, but a man with a high-pitched voice. Princess Surya heard the absurd theory and exploded with rage. The emperor considered the possibility. This could be a trap set by some wizard. Orwell felt that the conversation was going in a very dangerous direction, but the emperor continued, speculating that it was a strategy to exploit their prejudices. Princess Surya's patience reached its limit. She couldn't take so much absurdity anymore and simply snapped. Orwell considered, once again, writing his resignation letter. The situation had gone beyond all limits. The conversation reminded him of the curse that had plagued the kingdom of Xi'an for centuries, a curse that directly affected the kingdom's river, and that the royal family has never been able to solve. Princess Surya apologized, admitting her failure to care for the river as Xi'an's heir. The emperor listened in silence. He pondered the situation. He explained that rain or the river would solve the drought, but the aqueducts were still coping for now. The emperor tried to calm her, telling her not to blame herself so much. He then suggested that it was late and that they should both rest. Meanwhile, elsewhere the drought was a much more pressing matter. In a meeting, one of the nobles warned the emperor about the drought that had already lasted 6 months. He said that the people were furious and demanded a sacrifice to appease divine wrath. The emperor heard the proposal and considered it complete nonsense. With a firm gesture, he rejected the idea. Sacrifices had no place in his government. The emperor remained in his chambers, still processing the absurd proposal of sacrifice to end the drought. But then, a grand announcement interrupted his thoughts. A maid announced the arrival of Princess Surya Brienne Fifth Xian with all pomp and circumstance. Only the princess who entered, carried with all reverence, was actually a chicken. One of the assistants barely managed to hold back laughter at the scene. The small crown, which barely balanced, finally fell. Even so, the assistant composed himself and said that he needed to talk to her about something important. The chicken, unfazed, asked what he wanted to talk about. The young man stared at her, trying to take the situation seriously, until, suddenly, a bizarre idea seemed to cross his mind. The thought was so disturbing that he simply ran away, leaving the princess confused. Out of nowhere, a pile of books appeared in front of her. Soria stared at the books as if she knew exactly what to do. With her beak, she opened one of the volumes. A magical energy emanated from her, showing that this chicken was much more than it seemed. The magical energy emanating from the book finally exploded. A gentle touch on the wood marked the end of the transformation. And in place of the little chicken, Soria was back in her human form, completely stunned by what had happened. Meanwhile, the emperor ordered his assistant to be forcibly removed. The man begged to stay, but the request was denied. Alone, the emperor delved into deep thought. Clearly, something was bothering him. His gaze turned to an old portrait on the wall, a family memory that, at that moment, seemed to carry an enormous weight. Elsewhere, the imperial mage was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Seeing the man's state, the emperor relaxed and admitted that he was just kidding. But he quickly got to the point, questioning why the kiss he gave the princess didn't break the curse completely. The wizard's answer seemed to come straight out of a fairy tale. The curse was only partially broken because it wasn't a kiss of true love. The emperor was speechless. To him, that idea was completely ridiculous. The wizard, however, saw this as the perfect opportunity to suggest that the emperor finally give the empire an empress. The wizard continued his speech. It would be the perfect chance to give the empire an empress and finally break the ancient curse. He painted a grandiose scenario with bards singing about their love story for generations. The man seemed quite pleased with his own suggestion. He then reminded the emperor of all the advice he gave him when he was still courting his wife. The emperor's memory, however, was a little different. In his version, the wizard owed him everything. He remembered an incident where the wizard fell into a lake, but the other insisted that it was irrelevant. The wizard just nodded and promised that he would do everything to return the favor. The emperor was already getting a headache from that conversation. Changing the subject, the wizard asked about the princess. The emperor didn't even bother to adjust himself in his chair. The wizard commented that it must have been devastating for her to return to her chicken form. He informed him that she was locked in her room and suggested that the emperor go check on her. The emperor seemed to ponder the idea. The wizard noticed the change in attitude and wanted to know what made him reconsider. The wizard asked what made him change his mind. The emperor didn't seem happy to discuss the matter at all. The conversation shifted to the suggestion Soria had made before, a way to solve the drought in the south. The assistant insisted that her proposal should be taken seriously by His Majesty. The emperor listened in silence, processing the information. The proposal was clear: annex the kingdom of Xi'an to the empire. Orwell then asked what was wrong with the idea. The emperor's patience finally ran out. He exploded, accusing the assistant of completely ignoring him. Orwell, however, was not fazed by the outburst. The tension in the hall was heavy. The emperor patted Orwell on the shoulder. Ending the conversation, he said that the world doesn't always work the way we want it to. That's when the wizard cleared his throat, drawing attention to himself. The emperor's frustration was visible. He could barely contain himself. Seeing the princess passed out on the bed, the emperor didn't know what to do. The situation was a disaster. Seeing the princess passed out, the emperor didn't know what to do. The situation was a complete disaster. The wizard then presented the solution: a document that would recognize Xi'an as an independent country, with Croatia respecting all its rights. The emperor took the document to read the terms, but the validity of the agreement depended on one condition: the Xi'an River needed to flow again. The princess, who was listening to everything, didn't seem convinced at all. She simply ignored the conversation, pecking at the blanket as if nothing was happening. The emperor, however, understood immediately that there was a problem. His expression changed completely. The mage then revealed the condition to break the curse. The emperor needed to know what true love was, an idea that, to him, seemed completely abstract and childish. The emperor exploded with rage. How could he prove something so vague? He cursed the mage who created this situation. He was completely trapped. The abstract nature of true love was the biggest obstacle, and to everyone's surprise, the princess agreed. She protested, finding the condition too ambiguous to be fulfilled. The situation was driving the emperor crazy. The pressure was simply too much for him to bear. He clenched his fist, trying to contain his own frustration. But the main problem remained. And to make matters worse, the princess could only communicate with very specific people. Apparently, the princess's communication was limited only to mages. The problem is that magic was a dying art. With each new obstacle, the emperor's patience ran out. His fury was so intense that it gave the poor helper chills. While Sir Chen pondered the situation, Princess Soria was already losing patience with his delay. He needed to make a decision, but the mission was simply too bizarre. Sir Chen then asked the princess a serious question. He wanted to know if she was prepared to face any trial to break the curse. His question hung in the air for a moment. The princess didn't understand his sudden seriousness. With the decision made, he approached the princess. A memory motivated him, an old promise that needed to be fulfilled no matter the cost. She finally understood what the trial was. The panic was instantaneous. He tried to convince himself. He stated that at that moment, his heart was full of love. The princess's reaction was pure confusion. What was he talking about? That's when he revealed his theory. If a kiss transformed her for 5 minutes, maybe 100 kisses would break the curse for good. It was time to test it. Princess Soria freaked out at the idea. In a panic, she tried to peck Sir Chen, shouting that he had to be completely crazy. The chaotic chase began through the garden. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Lady Maybelline offered words of support to the emperor, assuring him that everyone was rooting for him. But the support didn't seem to calm him down. On the contrary, all his frustration was vented on the poor piece of cake in front of him. Lady Maybelline's tranquility, however, had a limit. With a single word, she told him to stop, and he obeyed immediately. Silence took over the table. With a sweet smile, she then mentioned that dozens of people had seen the emperor entering the princess's room. The gossip, it seemed, was already spreading throughout the palace, and she knew exactly the power that those words carried. Lady Maybelline downplayed the situation, saying that wasn't the point. The problem was what the other ladies were already commenting on. The rumor, of course, had already taken on a life of its own and very creative interpretations. The emperor tried to process the information. A strange conversation he had with another noblewoman came to his mind, and then it clicked. The shock was so great that he completely lost his composure. Another sweet was sacrificed on the altar of imperial stress. Desperate, the emperor tried to justify himself. He said it was all a misunderstanding, that he was just testing the girl's loyalty. The noblewoman, however, didn't seem convinced. She commented that, in general, context mattered. She kept her composure, finding it curious that the emperor would even bother to continue that conversation. She recalled how the emperor, from a young age, was forced to befriend the duke's sons, only to be sent to war upon reaching adulthood, and it was thanks to those friends that he managed to survive the battlefield. His reign, she explained, was the result of meticulous planning. Nothing was left to chance. Therefore, it was understandable that everyone was so careful in choosing his future empress. The emperor then wanted to know if the other noblewomen supported Princess Soria. She replied that the situation was more one of concern than support, and handed him a record. He was shocked to realize that the noblewomen actually thought very poorly of him. The noblewoman corrected him. It wasn't that they thought poorly of him, but of the emperor he seemed to be. Suddenly, a deafening noise and a very familiar clucking interrupted the conversation. It was Princess Soria, in her chicken form, taking out all her anger on a pillow. In her fury, she uttered the worst curses she could think of against the knight. After the fit of rage, the chicken princess was completely exhausted. Immediately afterwards came the regret. Soria scolded herself for losing her composure like that. After the fit of rage, Princess Soria collapsed, exhausted. The idea of being kissed 100 times by that knight was simply unbearable. But amidst the despair, a spark of determination arose. She wasn't going to accept that. In her mind, Sir Chen wasn't a savior, but a pervert. Soria refused to accept that he would be her Prince Charming. She couldn't believe her fate would be so cruel. A decision was made. Soria tried to convince herself that his beauty didn't matter. After all, What good was being handsome with an attitude like that? The princess was determined to change her own destiny. She wanted a man who was gentle, not just attractive. Someone who would ask for her permission instead of forcing the situation. Soria dreamed of a normal future with a husband with whom she could have children. And above all, someone to rebuild her kingdom, Xian, by her side. The maid, not understanding anything, was impressed by the princess's passion. Seeing the agitation, the maid asked if Her Highness wished to go out. Unable to speak, Soria began pecking at the door with all her might. She was determined to leave and find her true prince. The maid, finding the scene adorable, decided to help. As soon as the door opened, the chicken princess darted down the hall. The maid watched the escape, amused by Soria's determination. Only then did she realize what was happening and ran after her, asking the princess to wait. Princess Soria's escape, however, didn't last long. She was quickly captured and taken to another hall of the palace. There, they prepared a somewhat peculiar reception for the guest of honor. But the hospitality was a little exaggerated, and the princess ended up with her face dunked in the tea. Soria didn't like the forced reception one bit. This was definitely not the treatment she was expecting. Meanwhile, the emperor began a lecture, questioning the similarity between mana and aura. The princess didn't understand anything he was talking about. The man continued his line of reasoning, completely oblivious to the chicken's confusion. To Soria, it was all just a bunch of meaningless gibberish. The emperor then explained that all the imperial mages were busy in the south. The princess's patience had finally reached its limit. She was fed up with that conversation. It was at that moment that a new figure entered the room, interrupting the discussion. The emperor turned to the newcomer, a knight called Dame Megan. The knight looked visibly nervous about the situation. Then the emperor made the announcement. Dame Megan would be Princess Soria's new personal guard. Princess Soria couldn't believe it. A knight who used aura as her personal guard. The emperor, on the other hand, was clearly enjoying the whole situation. Soria thought it was a waste of talent, putting such an incredible warrior in a simple bodyguard job. Then, the princess turned to the knight. Dame Megan, all flustered, tried to say she was happy to serve, but the situation was tense. The discussion was far from over, and the emperor was already starting to lose patience. Soria, however, decided to confront him directly. She argued that it was a waste of resources and that he should simply hand the knight over to her. The princess's audacity was the last straw for the emperor. Soria then tried to convince Dame Megan to switch sides, praising the qualities of her own country. The proposal left the knight in a very uncomfortable situation, but the argument continued, echoing through the palace halls. Soria insisted that she didn't need anyone, as she knew how to take good care of herself. Until, in the middle of the discussion, she realized something. She was acting like a chicken. Soria panicked, trying to remind herself that she was human. Amidst the panic, Soria ran aimlessly through the palace corridors. When she stopped, she realized she was completely lost. An open door seemed to be the only way out of that endless corridor. But the place she found was the most dangerous of all, the imperial kitchen. A place full of giant pots and fresh ingredients. Soria tried to blend in, but her presence did not go unnoticed. The head chef noticed the intruder immediately. Suddenly, someone shouted that one of the chickens had escaped. Too late, but the princess wasn't going to become dinner that easily. She took off running. The chef, annoyed, grabbed his biggest knife to solve the problem. The first blow whizzed past, by a hair's breadth. Soria's life flashed before her eyes. With the princess cornered, the cook raised the knife for the final blow. Would this be the end of the line for Soria?